Hi, welcome to my channel. My name is Elma, and welcome to 2024. Happy New Year, everyone. Wow, I can't believe it. Another year has gone by already. Crazy. In this video, I wanted to be talking about um, all the books that I read to complete a challenge that Chantel Reads All Day put out in her 2023 challenge, her Read Your Bookshelf challenge. And I remember last January when I started it, I thought, I don't know if I'm going to be able to do this. This was the first year I really got back into reading, but I did want to challenge myself. I thought maybe I could read a few books in the challenge, but hey, I did all 12 months, and I'm so proud of myself for that to complete those. And I read some really good books. So I'm going to go through my notes here of the books that um, I read, and I'll talk about all the different prompts that she gave because she had a really fun way to challenge us to read this year. And I will also link below her, not only her video for last year, just kind of to show you what her prompts were, but also the one that she just put out for 2024, which I'm planning to do that one as well. So I'll link both of those. So to begin with, again, it's called the Read Your Bookshelf Challenge. And so in January, she gave us the prompt of a book that starts with A or the. And the book that I chose to read for that one was The Girl Who Came Home by Hazel Gaynor. And this was a historical fiction book. And this was set around the time of the Titanic. And it was a dual timeline um, story. And it's revolved around a young girl named Maggie. And she was from Ireland. And she was leaving her homeland in Ireland to come to the United States for a better um, just a better way of life. They had famine and hardships and things, and so her family chose to come get on board the Titanic and try to find a better life in the States, in America. But she left behind her first love, and that's part of the story, and her what she left behind. And now the dual timeline revolves around her great granddaughter Grace, who never really heard about her grandmother's story, that she was even on the Titanic, that she was a survivor of the Titanic. And Grace is a journalist or a journalism student, and so she wants to write this story about her grandmother. And so she's hearing the story that her grandmother tells her, and it's really a really good story. Not only, if you're a big Titanic history buff fan and like enjoy reading stories of the Titanic, you would enjoy this one. And then there's a kind of a little twist at the end that I really enjoyed. So that was the first book I read in the challenge. And so Chantel did something interesting with her challenge, in that each next prompt has to do something with the last book that you just read. So our February prompt was to read a book that had a complementary color on the cover or the spine of the book that you just read. And so for this book, I chose The Midnight Library by Matt Haig. And this is a um, fantasy kind of book, and it is has to do with alternate realities. In this book, we have a young woman named Nora, and she's going through a bit of a hard time. She's depressed, and it starts off with her having a bad day. She loses one job. She teaches music, and she loses one of her only client. So basically, she loses two jobs in one day, and the final thing that puts her over the edge is that her cat dies. And so she just gets flung into a really low point in her life, and she ends up taking some pills. And when she wakes up, she thinks she's dead, but she actually finds herself in a magical kind of library. And the librarian there tells her that she is going to be she she shows her all the books that are all around her, and there's thousands of them. And the librarian explains to her that each book is a book of her life, and depending on what choices that she made in her life would lead to the lives in those books. Say, for instance, she in, instead of stopping her swimming career as an athlete in her life, her present life, she had stopped swimming competitively. But what if she kept doing that? What if she went on to compete and in college and that kind of thing? And then so she told her, once you make a choice or decide what life you want to try, then she would be transported to this life. And then she had the option that if she enjoyed that life, if that life was something that pleased her, then she could stay there. And so um, that was something that was so interesting. So she did that. So, and that was the whole book of her choosing different live realities and living them. And then at the end, she had to determine which life is she gonna choose. And so that was a really interesting book. And so that was my book for February. That was an interesting read. Okay, so the next book is for February. And in February, we have the prompt was title starts with the next letter in the alphabet. So since I had the Midnight Library, my next book had to start with the letter U. So for that book, I chose Unwritten, and that's by Charles Martin. And that book is a contemporary book, and the story revolved around a woman named Katie Quinn, and she was a famous actress, had a ton of money because she was such a famous actress. But yet, even with all her fame and fortune, she was not happy. There was things in her past that she was dealing with and she had buried, and that nobody knew about, and it was starting to um, affect her life. And she was another woman that, she just wanted to, she didn't want to live anymore. And her friend, a close friend of hers, who was a priest, his name was the character was Father Steady, and he was a really really interesting character, almost like a fatherly figure to her, or grandfatherly figure to her, because he was like in his 80s, 70s or 80s. But anyway, he came in to help her, and the way he helped her was by introducing her to another friend of his, a man named Pete. And Pete also had kind of a similar story to Katie, in that he had something in his past that he was running away from. And so the book is about their relationship and how they confide in each other, ultimately confide in each other with what happened in their lives, and the healing that takes place. And it was really a beautiful beautiful book, so I really enjoyed that one. So that was my March book. In April, Chantel's next prompt is read a book in a different genre. So since that was a contemporary, I decided to pick up a middle grade book, and that book, it was called Iceberg by Jennifer Nielsen. And this book is again another Titanic take on the Titanic book. And this was a really sweet story. It was, like I said, it was a middle grade, and it's the story of a girl named Hazel, and she was coming to her parents, or her mother sent her to America, and for a better life as well. And when she got to to get on the Titanic, she realized that the money that her mother had given her wasn't enough for a ticket to get on the boat or the ship. So, and she decided to be a stowaway, and she got on board. And so the story is about her on the Titanic, and how she makes it through. She survives. She's a survivor of the Titanic, and what she does aboard it. She is her dream is to become a journalist. So while she's on the board, before the ice, before the Titanic strikes the iceberg, on board, she's going around interviewing people and taking notes because she wants to write the story about this first voyage, and she wants to turn it in to a newspaper place in a newspaper place in New York when she arrives, and she's going to make a life for herself that way. So it's a really good little middle grade book about the Titanic and this young girl's story of how she interacts with people on board, and how she deals with the tragedy as well. Okay, so come now we have May, and May's prompt was read a book that has more pages than the last book. So for this book, I chose Project Hail Mary by Matt Weir, and this was one of my #1 books of the year. I think it was tied for first place because I loved it so much. And I've done a video of all my favorite books of the year, and I'll make sure I link that below so you can watch that if you like. This book was so good. I go on and on and on about it. Um, I I knew that this author had written the book The Martian, which later became the movie, and I hadn't read the book yet. I ended up reading it later on in the year, but at that point I hadn't read the book. I'd only seen the movie, and I loved the movie. And so I kind of heard a little bit about what the premise of the book was, and it sounded really interesting to me because I'm a lover of sci-fi movies and fantasy and that kind of thing. So it just sounded really good to me. So the premise of the book, and I'm only going to tell you a little bit because I don't want to ruin or spoil anything for you, because it is a book that while you're reading it, you just, at least for me, I just kept reading. I just had to know what happened. But you start off, the book starts off with a man waking up, and when he wakes up, he does not know who he is. He doesn't know where he's at, and he he realizes that he is in space. He's on a spaceship in space, far from Earth, and he has to. The whole book is him trying to figure out, #1, who he is, and why he's in space, and why he's alone in space, and what his mission is. What is he doing there? And so the book, it's really fast paced, and it kind of reminds you of like Castaway because he's by himself. But we do have some flipping back of what happened, how he got there, to see that backstory, and the story is amazing. So I really enjoyed that one. So that was my book for May. And then for June, our prompt was title has half as many letters. So Project Hail Mary had 14 letters. So I had to choose a book that had 7 letters. And so that was the book that I chose for that one was Restart by Gordon Korman. And this one has a little similar um, theme to it from my last book, because this book is about a young boy named Chase, and he is the bully of his school. He's really horrible to the kids around him. He makes life miserable for kids, basically. And one day he is on his roof doing something, and he falls, and he hits his head, and he loses consciousness. And when he wakes up, he has amnesia. He doesn't know who he is. And so it's kind of like Project Hail Mary. He doesn't, he has no memory of himself. So in that, he doesn't remember being a bully. He has like almost like a different personality when he wakes up. He's just, you know, um, just a regular young man, boy. And when he goes back to school, he notices that people around him are scared of him. They keep their distance from him, and he doesn't understand, or he doesn't know that is that he was a bully. And in fact, you know he he starts being friends with someone he actually was really horrible to. And so the book is about him learning about who he really was in his life, and how he deals with that. It's really a good book for a middle grade book, a really good storyline. So that is Restart by Gordon Korman. So I recommend this one. It's really good. Okay, so that was June. Now we're on to July. And the next prompt was to read a book set in a different country or world. And so the last book was set in the United States. So I picked a book, a historical fiction by Susan Meisner. And this one is called Only the Beautiful. And now this book, it it does take place in the United States, but it's a story with two people split up. Like the first part of the book is about one character, and the second part of the book is about a second character, and that second character is living in Europe. And so, and then at the end of the book, these two characters, their stories kind of collide together, and that it makes for an interesting read. This book is a revolves around a young woman in California in 1938. Her name is Rosie, and she's 16 years old, and her parents and her brother, young brother, die in a car accident. And they had been, her father was a vineyard worker, and they all lived on this vineyard. And when her family is killed, the vineyard owner that his wife, him and his wife take on this 16-year-old girl with them. They don't adopt her, but they just bring her into their home, and the wife basically has her as a maid for her. And tried also this girl, she has an ability where she sees colors when she hear with certain sounds. With when she hears sound, different sounds, she sees colors, and that really is a thing that people really do have that. But back in this day and age, people didn't know what that was, and so as a child, she would describe that to her family, and her parents always told her, "Don't tell anybody. Keep that a secret." Because that people would think she was odd or something was wrong with her. Well, um, this poor girl ends up pregnant, and instead of being sent to a woman home for unmarried pregnant women, she gets sent to a like a mental institution because of her how she can see colors. They find out about it. And so this book deals with the topics of eugenics back in that time. And then, like I said, the next half of the book is of the woman named Helen, who lives in Austria, and she is dealing with life after World War II, after living in Europe during the war, and the things that she did during that time. And then at the end of the book, their lives kind of collide, and it is really interesting. So that was the book that I read for July. And then the next month, August, our prompt was to read the same genre. And so I picked another um, Susan Meisner book for this month. So Only the Beautiful was historical fiction. I read another historical fiction because that's the same genre, and that book was called The Nature of Fragile Things. Now this book, this might have been my favorite of my Susan Meisner books that I read this year. This book was set around the time of the San Francisco Great Fire, and our character is Sophie, and she's an Irish woman that is wanting to leave her home in Ireland because of things that happen, and she wants to get away from that. And the way that she finds a way is by answering an ad about a for a like a mail order bride. There's a man in Los Angeles. His name's Martin, and he's a widower, and he has a young child, and he wants a wife to take so that he so that she can take care of his child, and that also because he travels a lot in his business. So um, Sophie answers this ad, and she travels to the United States and marries this man, and they end up moving to San Francisco, and then their lives are upended whenever the earthquake happens, and other things happen as well. And the story is, it turned out the rest, I thought it was just going to be about the earthquake, which it was, but then there was other things that happened later on that were like, wow, I didn't expect that to happen. It was really good. So that was the book I had for August. And then September, we were supposed to, the book that we just read, we were supposed to turn to page 50. And then of the words on that page, we would find a word. And then that word would be in our next book's title. And so for that one, I read the word that I picked out for on that page was match. And then I had, because I had this book, and it's called A Match Made in Texas, and it's a novella collection, a old like a Western novella romance book, and there's 4 stories, and I read the first one by Karen uh, Whitmire, and the story that I read was called A Cowboy Unmatched, and that story um, was about a cowboy that rides into town. His name is Neil, and he's looking for work. And he goes to the town, and he tells them, I'm in just going riding through town, and I'm in need of work if anybody has work. And someone tells him about a widow that needs help with her roof, fixing her roof. And so he goes out to her home, her farm where she lives, and he knocks on her door and says, I'm coming to answer your ad about fixing your roof. Well, the woman that lives there, her name is Clara, and she is kind of surprised because she did not put an ad for her roof to be fixed. So, that was a little like, who did that? And I believe it's the matchmaker did that. But so their story goes on about how he just goes ahead and helps this woman. He sees that she's in trouble because she's pregnant, and her father-in-law, because his son has passed away, wants the child. And the father-in-law is like a powerful rancher in the town, so there's that kind of drama going on. So that one was a really good book, and I read the first one of the novellas in here, so I think I'm going to try to read the rest of these this year as well. Okay, so that was September. And so October, our prompt is the first letter of the author's last name is the first letter of the title. So I had Karen Whitmire. So for my next book, I picked Where the Lost Wander by Amy Harmon. And this was my second book of Amy Harmon's that I read up to this point. And this book was set in this book was set in the 1800s. 1853 I think was the year it started, and we're following another woman, a young widow. She's only 20 years old, and her family are headed to California, and they're taking the famous Oregon Trail at that time, and that's when they're traveling, on the wagon with these wagons. And she meets a man by the name of John, and he's half Pawnee, and he is one of the men that is in charge of kind of um, leading her company, her group, or her train to the west. And so the story is the journey and how hard it is. It talks about how when they moved, they couldn't take all their belongings because they could only fit so much in these wagons, and most of the time they walked or rode their horses, but they couldn't take a lot of they couldn't take hardly any furniture or anything like that, and mostly what they packed was food. And they talked about the hardships and about how people were ill. A lot of disease happened with these people as they traveled west, and the weather, and then the Native Americans, they were afraid of them as they went through. And so some tragedies happen, but we also have a sweet love story between Naomi and John as they get to know each other. And it is really a really sweet story, and it's a good uh, historical book regarding the Oregon Trail. You can go down a rabbit hole when you start looking up things about how people, did that, back in that time period. So that was a great book, a great read for me this year. Then we have the next prompt in November, and it's choose a different time period. And so that was in the 1800s. So I went and I chose a book that was in the 1700s, in 1760. And this is another Amy Harmon book. And this book is called A Girl Called Samson. And this one, I just love this one. This one has our main character, Deborah. And Deborah, um, when she was 5 years old, her father left the home. He didn't want to be married anymore, and he didn't want his children. And so he just deserted them. And so during this time, as a mother, she uh, couldn't support and take care of her children. So what she did was she sent her children off to live with different people. And so they were all separated, and Deborah went to live with an older woman, and when she was 5, and this woman didn't treat her very well. She was abusive to her. And so, but she was there for quite a while until a reverend came and took her, and because he saw that she was being mistreated, and he brought her to a family that needed a girl servant to help with the family. And this family had 10 boys. So she was a servant. She worked really hard. I mean, day and night she was working, even though she was only 10 years old. But yet at the same time, she bonded with this family, and she bonded with all the brothers, and she played, she ran around with them and was a tomboy and did all the things that they did, and was competitive with them. And then as the Revolutionary War started to happen, some of the older brothers went off into the military, and she had that spark in her that she wanted to do something for her country. And so she decides to disguise herself as a man and join the army. And nobody knows that she's a woman, and she does it so carefully. After she gets in there, they have no idea that she's a woman, because she's able to do the same kind of things that they all do. And but she takes great effort to keep her secret, like getting up really, really early to go to the bathroom, to go bathe in the river before anybody wakes up, because she has to hide that part of her. That whole part was so interesting. And then she, not only you have all of that going on, but you have Amy Harmon puts a really beautiful, beautiful love story in here, between her and somebody that she meets while she's doing what she's doing. And so, great story. And then the really interesting part was at the end of the book, in her notes, this story is based on an actual person that did this back during this time. So that was amazing to read. So again, this book, A Girl Called Samson, Amy Harmon, 5-star read for sure. And then the last prompt we have is in December was a page count that is within 20. And so that book, I decided to finish off the year with another historical fiction. You can tell that historical fiction, at least in this challenge, there was quite a few of these. But I finished it off with Susan Meisner historical fiction, and this one's called The Last Year of the War. And I just finished this, and when I started reading it, I didn't know if I was going to enjoy it as much as her other books, but this one really, it kind of built up to a really good story. And I read this aloud to my husband, and he really, really liked the book too. He really enjoyed it. So this is a story of a girl named Elise, and she's a young woman living in Davenport, Iowa, and her parents are from Germany, but her parents never became U.S. citizens. And this is during World War II. And at that time, the United States was getting suspicious of of families like hers because like I said, her parents were German and not yet become citizens, even though they had lived in the United States for many years, because her and her brother were both born in the States. So her father was arrested, and they were taken to an internment camp in Crystal City, Texas, which really is a real place in history where they had these internment camps. And there were German families there, Japanese families, and even Italian families that were taken here, and they lived, behind barbed wire with soldiers watching them. And during this time, she met this young Japanese young girl, and they formed a friendship there. And they decided, as had that friendship, that because they were 14 at the time, that when they turned 18 and when the war was over, when they were adults, they would meet each other again. They would travel to New York and live. Um, I can't remember I think they wanted to be writers or something like that. But they just wanted to be on their own together in New York. And that was the promise they made to each other. That was the hope they had. Well, both families get repatriated back to their country, their home countries, and they were traded basically for United States citizens that were, prisoners of war. They were exchanged. And so this young girl who had never been to Germany before, she didn't speak German, she was an American citizen. This was hard for her to all of a sudden be uprooted again, and now she's going to Germany with her family. And so the story goes on to see how she um, survives this last year of the war, which they say was the worst year of the war. In fact, when she got back to her her father's hometown in Germany, it was being devastated by bombings that were happening. But the story doesn't end there. It has a really great way that Susan Meisner wrote this regarding what happened in her life, and did she get back to the States like she wanted? Did she meet her friend in New York after all those years? You have to um, go check it out. Go read it if you haven't read it. I'd highly recommend her book for if you're if you like historical fiction, if you like books based in World War II, and it's interesting because you have that whole um, history of all the people that were put in these camps. Was really tragic because her father was innocent, but there was certain things that they found in his life that just looked guilty, and they just threw him in that camp. So that's the last book that I read for this challenge. And then so that is all the books I have today. So like I said, Chantel she actually did a new challenge for this year, and it's totally different. It's different kind of prompts. She actually has like a two-tier thing where you can go down one path or another path, and the prompts are different depending on which trail you follow. So that is going to be a fun thing to do. If you participated in this readathon this year, let me know in the comments, what books did you read for the different months, and have you read any of these books that I've talked about? If you have, just let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear your feelings about any of these books or the books that you read as well. Thank you so much for watching with me today. Again, Happy New Year, and have a blessed day. Bye-bye.